Warm greetings, Code Monkeys, and welcome back to Superhero Month. So, Thor. I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that the Thor movies are probably the least popular series in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And in fact, if not for Loki, I think that there are a fair number of people who would just skip these movies altogether. And it's kind of weird because Asgard itself is actually tremendously important to the cosmology of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the Thor movies themselves are kind of not that important to understanding the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's weird. Like, it's important to know that the Asgardians were a real thing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's also helpful to have seen Thor 1 before you see the Avengers so that you understand a little bit more about the Tesseract and what's going on with Thor and Loki and all that. But the movies themselves have very little to do with any of that story-wise. And I guess in some regards, it's not all that surprising to me that the Thor movies are the least popular in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because the Jack Kirby-esque cosmic fantasy stuff was always, I think, going to be the hardest aspect of the Marvel Universe to make appealing to a broader audience. And I'm gonna get to why I think the Thor movies just fall kind of flat overall a little bit later, but I want to actually touch on the movies themselves a little bit, sort of briefly, before I get into that. I think the first Thor movie is actually a lot better than people generally give it credit for, but like the first Iron Man movie, it's definitely started to show its age a little bit. There is a lot of world building that happens in the first Thor movie, and it gets all of that out of the way extremely efficiently. And the movie is tremendously visually unique. Like, I really love seeing Asgard and its denizens and like all the frost giants and stuff like that. This movie is very cool to look at. And I think that Kenneth Branagh was actually a pretty good choice to direct the first Thor movie, because he has kind of this background in a lot of more Shakespearean style stories. And the Thor movies are big and operatic and hyper emotional, and someone who has experience directing Shakespeare is definitely a good fit for that. If there's one aspect of the directing that is kind of weak in the first movie, however, it's the action. I don't really get the sense that Kenneth Branagh is all that great of an action director, or maybe he really is, and I just don't know because I haven't seen other movies where he's done better. But ultimately, the first Thor movie is a little bit too odd for its own good, and it has the one big main problem with the Thor series, which again I'll get to in a moment. Thor number 2, however, is much better than the first one. For one thing, it examines the Thor and Loki dynamic on a much deeper and more interesting level, even if it does put their mother in the fridge to do so. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston inject a lot more subtlety and nuance into their performances this time around, which I think is at least partially directorial. The side characters all get much more of a chance to shine, and the action scenes are much better and much more imaginative. And Idris Elba as Heimdall. Dude, Idris Elba as Heimdall. He kills a spaceship with a couple of knives, and it's awesome! But anyway, I've been alluding to this main problem with the Thor series overall, and that problem is that Thor himself is just a really flat and uninteresting character when you get right down to it. It does make him a good straight man for everyone else to kind of bounce off of, but it's just never seemed to be enough to make up for the fact that he's just boring. He can be fun to watch in his own way, I suppose, certainly when there's action going on, or when he's kind of hamming it up in a very Asgardian kind of way, but he just isn't nearly as dynamic or deep as Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, or Clint, whatever the fuck Hawkeye's last name is. Barton, that's it. Clint Barton. And I suppose now Natasha Romanoff, because let's be honest here, Black Widow's character didn't really start to take on very much dimension until we got to Captain America the Winter Soldier, and then we had to wait for Civil War to mop up the big pile of stupid that was Natasha's characterization in Avengers 2. Sorry, I'm getting off topic again. Anyway, back to Thor himself. He's flat. He doesn't change. Okay, so in the first movie, he has to prove himself worthy of his own power by being willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. But it was really kind of cliched basic character development, and beyond Thor 1, his character development has just been totally non-existent. He and Loki have made their relationship as brothers more complex and dynamic, but Thor himself is just so static, which I think is kind of what they're going for, the idea that these characters being so long-lived don't really change all that significantly over the course of their extremely long lives, which is thematically appropriate, sure, but it just makes for a really uninteresting main character. Add to that Natalie Portman is a really, really disposable love interest, and also flat and uninteresting herself, and the Thor movies can kind of get tedious at times. That being said, Thor: The Dark World isn't really so much Thor's movie as it is Loki's movie, which is a good idea because even the people who hate the Thor movies will usually acknowledge that Loki is the best thing about them. Loki gets the most character development and the most dimension in the second film, and let's be honest here, he's a far more interesting character than Thor is. He's more dynamic, his relationship with his father and mother is more complex, his backstory is much more interesting, and he's just generally a lot more likable than Thor is. So where does that leave us with the Thor series overall? Thor number 1 I would say is worth borrowing. Thor number 2 I would actually give a worth owning. There's a lot to recommend the second Thor movie in particular. Like I said, I definitely think the series is better than people say it is, but like Iron Man, it's not the sort of series that inspires multiple rewatchings. And that'll be about it for this one. Come back in a couple days when I will be talking about Captain America. Ironically, I'll be actually filming that on a different day, so I won't be wearing a Captain America shirt. Or maybe I will. Yeah, no, I've got another Captain America shirt in my closet. Yeah, I'll still be wearing a Captain America shirt, so until next time, Code Monkeys, I will see you later. Which I think is at least partially... God damn it, phone.